The spring and summer of 1942 marked the darkest period in the history of the U.S. Navy in the Pacific. After Pearl Harbor, America faced a harsh reality. Its aircraft carrier fleet was severely depleted, while the Japanese forces were strong and aggressive, ready to exploit tactical advantages and the element of surprise. Early in the year, the U.S. Navy realized that naval warfare would not only be a contest of wits between admirals or a test of pilots' skills, but a life-and-death race where the loss of each ship was a critical blow, and each defeat could determine the outcome of the entire war. On May 8, 1942, the Battle of the Coral Sea erupted. For the first time in history, aircraft carriers faced off directly via planes without ever seeing each other on the sea. USS Lexington, one of the two massive carriers the U.S. had before the war, played a central role in the battle. Converted from a pre-war cruiser hull, Lexington was a symbol of American power in the Pacific. But her fate was far from easy. During the Coral Sea battle, Lexington was hit by 2 torpedoes and 3 bombs from Japanese aircraft, causing severe damage. Sailors poured all their effort into saving the ship and preventing secondary explosions. Yet gas from ruptured fuel tanks triggered violent secondary explosions that ultimately sank the vessel. 216 U.S. sailors went down with Lexington, marking America's first aircraft carrier loss in the war. The shock forced admirals to reassess the strength they had left in the Pacific. Less than a month later, on June 7th, the Battle of Midway took place, a strategic victory, but one accompanied by painful losses. USS Yorktown, hastily repaired in just 48 hours at Pearl Harbor after Coral Sea, took part and played a crucial role in sinking 4 Japanese carriers. However, immediately following the victory, Yorktown became a target of torpedoes from the Japanese submarine I-168. Despite temporary repairs allowing her to fight, Yorktown could not withstand another attack and was lost. The loss of Yorktown was a heavy blow to the already limited American forces. From an initial 7 carriers, only 5 remained. This failure drove home an important realization for U.S. strategists. Winning a battle did not automatically ensure strategic superiority. Even a small mistake or the loss of one more carrier could reverse the entire situation. On September 15, 1942, USS Wasp, operating off Guadalcanal, fell to the Japanese. The apex of the tragedy came on October 26-27, 1942, at the Battle of Santa Cruz. USS Hornet, the hero of the Doolittle Raid and Midway, became the target of Japanese bombers and torpedo planes. Although U.S. sailors attempted to save Hornet, even towing the burning ship away from danger, advancing Japanese surface forces forced her to be abandoned. Japanese destroyers Makigumo and Akigumo completed the mission, sinking Hornet in the early hours of October 27th. With Hornet gone, USS Enterprise remained the only operational U.S. carrier in the Pacific. In the eyes of the admirals, the situation seemed nearly hopeless. Admiral Ernest King, reporting to Congress, confronted the stark truth. 1 U.S. carrier against 10 Japanese carriers, simple math showed that America was losing in the Pacific. All strategies and plans seemed powerless against the reality of the battlefield. The loss of 4 carriers, Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet, was not only a material blow but a psychological one. Sailors, officers, and military leaders alike had to question whether they could overcome this crisis. Yet, in that darkness, ordinary Americans, welders, workers, engineers, were preparing for an unprecedented production revolution in shipyards across the country. Margaret Thompson, a young welder in Newport News, Virginia, entered the yard one night unaware that her actions, along with those of millions of others, would reshape history. While the U.S. Navy was losing ships, Margaret and her colleagues would prove that America's true strength lay in its factories' assembly lines and the determination of its people, not just in combat skill or the initial number of ships. Notably, while the U.S. was losing ships, Japan continued to produce new ones. In shipyards from Yokosuka to Kure, Japanese workers were building additional carriers, planning to maintain naval supremacy. Yet they did not realize that America's production capacity would far exceed expectations, turning Japanese victories into temporary gains and American losses into the foundation for an unprecedented resurgence. In just 3 years, the U.S. would not only replace lost carriers, but surpass the entire Japanese Navy S-power through Essex-class carriers and breakthrough production techniques. American admirals understood the strategic math. They could not afford to lose more than the enemy. They could not trade evenly carriers. Every loss was a nearly irrecoverable step backward. Yet, in the darkest phase, America began harnessing unparalleled industrial might, mobilizing the entire nation for war, turning failure into opportunity, and preparing for a historic turning point that would forever change the Pacific. The tragedies of 1942 were not only material losses but tests of spirit. Despair, tension, fear, and even doubt permeated the U.S. Navy. Yet this period also forged determination, as every admiral, sailor, and worker realized that only through collective strength and immense production capacity could they transform the Japanese seas from a threat into America's domain. When USS Hornet sank beneath the waves at Santa Cruz and USS Enterprise remained the lone U.S. carrier in the Pacific, few could have imagined that from the ashes of defeat would rise a monumental achievement, a production miracle unprecedented in naval history. Yet at that very moment, in shipyards across Newport News, Brooklyn, Richmond, and countless other locations across America, ordinary people, welders, engineers, women, farmers, and African-American laborers were preparing to write a new chapter in history. From the early days after Pearl Harbor, shipyards understood that the war was not only about naval battles, but also a race against time and quantity. If the U.S. did not quickly replace the carriers it had lost, each subsequent battle would become a human and strategic catastrophe. From this urgency emerged the concept of mass-producing warships, a seemingly impossible idea. How could one mass-produce aircraft carriers, among the most complex technical undertakings, in an assembly line fashion like automobiles? But shipyard managers, engineers, and craftsmen began finding answers through simple yet creative observations. Helen Matthews, a former seamstress recruited to the Newport News shipyard, first watched welders painstakingly attach steel plates to a ship's hull. She asked, "Why not sew them together like a continuous piece of fabric instead of riveting one by one?" What seemed like an ordinary question sparked a whole new perspective. Instead of riveting each plate individually, the yard adopted continuous welding, saving up to 75% of assembly time. More importantly, welding required less specialized skill than riveting. People with no prior experience could be trained in a few days instead of years. This was the first step in a production revolution. American shipyards also implemented modular prefabrication. Instead of installing components directly on the hull, sections such as flight decks, elevators, control rooms, and even plumbing and electrical systems were assembled on shore and then lifted into place as complete units. This technique allowed multiple teams to work simultaneously on different modules, reducing construction time from months to weeks. An elevator that once took 6 weeks to install could now be completed in days thanks to pre-assembled modules. The combination of modular prefabrication, continuous welding, and standardized components turned each shipyard into a massive production machine, where humans and technology operated in perfect sync, much like an automobile assembly line. Equally critical was manpower. Visionary industrialist Henry Kaiser recognized that achieving these goals required mobilizing the entire population, breaking down barriers of gender, race, and skill. Women made up 40% of the workforce in many Kaiser shipyards, transforming from individuals who had never wielded a hammer or welding torch into elite laborers, sweating over each steel plate and compartment. Figures like Margaret Thompson or Emma Rodriguez, a mother of 3 who had never used tools larger than a sewing needle, became some of the fastest welders and riveters in the yard, directly accelerating ship production. African Americans, previously restricted from technical positions, were allowed into shipyards under Executive Order 8802, becoming outstanding mechanics, fuel system installers, and electrical technicians. James Washington, a former farmer from Alabama, became a master pipe fitter at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, installing fuel systems on 5 carriers, each completed faster than the last. These workers were not merely building ships, they were healing America's wounds after Pearl Harbor, exacting revenge against the war through speed, skill, and labor. The synergy between people and technology produced extraordinary results. USS Essex, the first Essex-class carrier, was laid down on April 28, 1941, and launched in just 20 months, ready for combat by the end of 1942. USS Yorktown CV-10, laid down in December 1941, was launched in April 1943. USS Hornet CV-12, laid down in August 1942, launched in November 1943. Build times shrank rapidly thanks to a nationwide supply chain: steel from Pittsburgh, aluminum from Tennessee, cables and machinery from Akron and Detroit, all synchronized to meet urgent demands. Shipyards also developed standardized assembly lines. All electrical equipment, pumps, and mechanical components were uniform, allowing parts from Detroit, Philadelphia, or Brooklyn to fit any carrier without modification. These techniques spread quickly between shipyards, creating a synchronized production network where every step was optimized and labor was fully utilized. The result was the Essex Storm. This class of carriers not only replaced lost ships, but exceeded them in strength, size, speed, and aircraft capacity. Each Essex carried 9,100 planes, had a speed of 33 knots, and displaced 27 to 100 tons. While Japan lagged in building new carriers and training pilots, the U.S. created a force superior both in quantity and quality, turning the Pacific from a threat into the American fleet's playground. But it wasn't only the Essex. Henry Kaiser also developed escort carriers, or jeep carriers, for fleet escort and anti-submarine warfare, with unprecedented build times. USS Casablanca launched in under 8 months. While Japan required 2 years to convert a passenger ship into an escort carrier, the U.S. deployed dozens, dramatically altering the naval war's dynamics. Behind every number, every welded plate, were people racing against time and risking their lives in the shipyard. Over 3,000 workers perished in accidents, yet morale never faltered. Each passing day each ship launched meant fewer casualties for American sailors across the Pacific Islands. Images of USS Enterprise fighting alone adorned shipyard walls, reminding workers that they were contributing directly to victory. During this period, the U.S. also developed pilot training carriers on the Great Lakes, USS Wolverine and USS Sable, ensuring that new ships would not only have steel, but well-trained aviators. By 1944, 500 pilots were trained monthly on these ships, supplying the rapidly expanding Essex fleet. All these factors, technology, manpower, management, supply chains, and pilot training, combined into a production miracle, transforming the U.S. from a one-carrier-left situation into a naval superpower with overwhelming forces, leaving Japan unable to respond. The Japanese quickly recognized the shift. According to Commander Masatake Yokomiya's diary, America was producing carriers faster than Japan could train pilots, each new ship stronger than anything Japan possessed. By the Philippine Sea Battle in 1944, Japan had only 6 carriers left, while the U.S. deployed 9 Essex-class carriers and 8 light carriers, turning the battle into more of an execution than a real contest. This miracle extended beyond the war. Welding techniques, modular prefabrication, standardization, and workforce mobilization became lasting industrial legacies, setting post-war shipbuilding standards. Women, African Americans, and ordinary laborers demonstrated they could handle any complex industrial task. As Nimitz observed, America's true strength did not lie solely in its navy or strategy, but in its ability to transform the limitless productive capacity of a democracy into decisive power. Thanks to this miracle, just 3 years after losing 4 carriers, the U.S. had 14 Essex-class carriers in action, 9 light carriers, and 71 escort carriers, overwhelming Japan and laying the foundation for final victory in the Pacific. When the Essex-class carriers and light escort carriers set sail, the landscape of the Pacific War began to shift dramatically. These new ships were not merely replacements for those lost. They were proof of overwhelming superiority in numbers, quality, and strategic deployment. The Japanese, confident after their victories in 1942, now faced a harsh reality. They could no longer rely solely on technical skill or fighting spirit. They were losing to the industrial and human might of America. By early 1944, the U.S. fleet had reached a stable production rhythm. Brooklyn Navy Yard, Newport News Shipbuilding, Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, along with Kaiser's yards in Richmond and Vancouver, each operated as synchronized machines. Each yard had multiple ships in various stages: keel laying, modular prefabrication, welding, equipment installation, testing, and launching. USS Lake Champlain, laid down after Hornet, took just 15 months from keel laying to commissioning, a record for warship construction at the time. This was the clearest proof of America's ability to turn time itself into a strategic weapon. The workforce continued to expand. Women like Margaret Thompson and Emma Rodriguez and African Americans like James Washington continued to demonstrate their value. Thanks to training programs, they not only performed their work at remarkable speed, but also enhanced the quality of welding, assembly, and inspection, ensuring each newly launched ship was combat-ready immediately. This represented a wartime social revolution, breaking barriers of gender, race, and skill. Meanwhile, Japan remained slow. Their pilot training could not keep pace with the rapid deployment of U.S. carriers. Many Japanese carriers were launched but could not be deployed effectively, partly due to a lack of pilots, partly due to insufficient support equipment. This created a growing strategic gap, where the outcome of each naval battle was increasingly predetermined. In June 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea provided the clearest evidence of this dominance. The U.S. deployed 9 Essex-class carriers and 8 light carriers, while Japan had only 6 carriers, most with inexperienced pilots. The battle was no longer a contest of wits at sea, but a complete overwhelming. Japan lost nearly its entire naval air force, and its fleet was almost destroyed. Captain Jizaburo Ozawa later described the battle. "This was not a battle, but a death sentence for our forces. It was proof that faster industrial production, larger scale, and better trained personnel had become the ultimate determinant in naval warfare. Not only naval battles, but also amphibious campaigns were transformed. Essex-class and escort carriers provided firepower, aircraft support, and naval cover for landings at Saipan, Guam, Leyte, and Iwo Jima. Each new ship meant thousands of planes could be deployed, troops protected, and Japanese forces overwhelmed. Escort carriers, rapidly built on Liberty ship models, protected convoys, hunted submarines, and maintained supply lines, making amphibious operations feasible. Even as battles dragged on, ship production continued to accelerate. By August 1945, the U.S. had deployed 14 Essex-class carriers, 9 light carriers, and 71 escort carriers, alongside older carriers still in service. The total number of U.S. carriers far exceeded anything Japan could produce during the entire war. Simultaneously, supply chains and pilot training remained at full capacity, ensuring no ship was idle or unready for combat. This overwhelming advantage was starkly evident when Japan surrendered. On September 2, 1945, as the Japanese delegation boarded USS Missouri, they passed a U.S. fleet unlike anything they had ever seen. Over 100 carriers of all types occupying Tokyo Bay and surrounding waters. Commander Tamichi Hara, one of Japan's top captains, recorded, "We destroyed 4 carriers in 1942, but they replaced and tripled them. We did not lose to the Navy, but to the factories, the workers, and their determination. This victory was not the result of a single battle or brilliant military strategy, but the outcome of unmatched production capacity. Each Essex carrier, each escort carrier, each rapidly trained pilot was a link in the chain of victory. It was a powerful affirmation that, in modern warfare, industrial capability can decide success even more than tactics or advanced technology. Alongside its strategic impact, this production miracle left a lasting social and economic legacy. Populations in cities near shipyards surged. Richmond, California grew from 23,000 to 130,000 in just 3 years. Over $3 billion in wages flowed into the economy, creating a new middle class. Women and African Americans, previously limited in industrial roles, became key contributors in heavy industry, paving the way for long-term social reforms and equality. The direct effect on the battlefield was undeniable. Whenever the U.S. lost a carrier, 2 others were ready to sail. This completely reversed the strategic calculations from 1942. The arithmetic of war was now clear. Japan could not match production. America continually reinforced its forces, resulting in undeniable dominance. Admiral Chester Nimitz later confirmed, "The war was decided in 1943, not by battle, but by the new ships being launched. When we lost one, 2 others were already at sea. Japan could not keep up." The battles from 1944 to 1945, Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Okinawa, all confirmed this strength. No Japanese force could challenge the U.S. fleet in numbers or quality. Amphibious campaigns were fully supported, pilots thoroughly trained, escort carriers protected convoys. Everything operated in perfect synchrony like a flawless war machine. America AES production miracle was not only a strategic victory, but a testament to the power of a democratic society where ordinary citizens, workers, women, African Americans, could become decisive forces in war. From the ashes of Hornet, Lexington, Yorktown, and Wasp, America rose not only to replace what was lost, but to multiply it many times over. And when peace arrived, this legacy remained. Welding techniques, modular prefabrication, standardization, and assembly lines became the foundation for modern shipbuilding. The workforce trained during the war became the core of post-war industry. Women, African Americans, and millions of ordinary laborers demonstrated that in times of urgency, human spirit, skill, and determination could transform disaster into extraordinary victory. When the war ended and the American flag flew over Tokyo Bay, the Essex-class carriers, light carriers, and dozens of escort carriers stood silently on the water. Vivid proof of an unprecedented miracle, the ability to produce beyond all limits, the power of a nation united in purpose, and the decisive role of human effort in modern warfare. Yet these achievements were not merely military victories. They left a lasting legacy across industry, society, the economy, and strategic thinking. First, from an industrial perspective, the war spurred a true revolution. Continuous welding, modular prefabrication, standardized components, and mass production shipbuilding became the standard for modern naval construction. The workers, engineers, and shipyard managers became the nucleus of the post-war industrial base, propelling the U.S. to the forefront of shipbuilding technology and heavy machinery production. Each Essex-class carrier, capable of carrying 9,100 aircraft, traveling at 33 knots, and displacing over 27,000 tons, was not just a military asset, but a technical and organizational marvel, demonstrating the strength of large-scale production. From a social perspective, the war and the production miracle broke rigid barriers of gender, race, and labor skill. Millions of women, African Americans, and previously marginalized groups became key contributors to production. In doing so, they not only helped secure victory, but also paved the way for lasting social and professional reforms after the war. Figures like Margaret Thompson, Emma Rodriguez, James Washington, and millions of other workers proved that ordinary people could become decisive forces in history when given opportunity and responsibility. Economically, the massive flow of funds into shipyards, from wages for millions of workers to materials, transportation, and support services, created a new middle class. Richmond, California, for example, grew from 23,000 residents before the war to 130,000 within 3 years. Billions of dollars fueled the economy, driving infrastructure, housing, services, and education. The production miracle not only won the war, but laid the foundation for post-1945 American prosperity. From a strategic standpoint, what happened from 1942 to 1945 completely transformed perceptions of naval and modern warfare. Before Midway, victory depended on tactics, fighting spirit, and sometimes luck. After 1943, success was determined by production capacity and the ability to continually deploy forces. When the U.S. lost a carrier, 2 others were always ready to sail. Japan, no matter how skilled, could not keep pace. Admiral Chester Nimitz affirmed, "The war was decided not at sea, but in the shipyards, by the workers, and on the docks." From the Japanese perspective, U.S. dominance was more than numbers. "We did not lose to the U.S. Navy," Rear Admiral Hideo Yano later noted while visiting Norfolk Naval Shipyard. "We lost to the factories, to the workers, to production beyond limits." This was a crucial lesson. In modern warfare, industry and people can become the most powerful weapons, surpassing battleships and aircraft. This legacy also persists in skills and knowledge. Welding techniques, assembly, modular prefabrication, and supply chain management did not vanish after the war. They became standards for all large-scale industrial projects. In the U.S. shipyard, workers became engineers, plant managers, technicians, and teachers, passing on invaluable experience to future generations. Women who wielded welding torches and rivets, and African Americans who installed pipes and electrical systems, became the backbone of post-war civilian industry. Militarily, the Essex-class fleet set the standard for all U.S. naval strategy after the war. They not only secured victory in the Pacific, but provided the basis for maintaining global naval dominance during the Cold War. The rapid replacement of lost ships demonstrated that, in the 20th century, true power lay not in individual battles, but in the ability to continuously maintain and deploy forces. Looking at the bigger picture, from the 1942 disaster, Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet sunk by Japan, by August 1945, the U.S. had achieved overwhelming strength. 14 Essex-class carriers in combat, 9 light carriers, 71 escort carriers, and the remaining older carriers. This force exceeded Japan's ability to replace losses and even surpassed the entire British fleet. These numbers were not merely tactical victories, but a testament to the power of democratic production. These events offer profound lessons on the relationship between war, industry, and society. Modern warfare is not only about strategy and tactics. Production capacity, workforce management, and technology are decisive factors. Mobilizing the entire population, women, African Americans, ordinary laborers, can create a victorious force if properly trained and empowered. Supply chains and standardization are vital in industrial warfare. Every component must be interchangeable, rapidly deployable, and synchronized. Democratic industry can be a more powerful weapon than heavy arms. The U.S. won not only through ships, but through the ability to maintain, produce, and deploy forces continuously. Long-term legacy, skills, organization, and trained personnel form the foundation for post-war industrial, economic, and societal prosperity. In retrospect, workers like Margaret Thompson, Emma Rodriguez, James Washington, and millions of their colleagues turned a naval disaster into a production miracle. Every steel plate, weld, cable, and assembled compartment was a weapon in the hands of the American people, avenging fallen sailors and laying the groundwork for ultimate victory. They proved that a free nation's true power lies not in tactics alone, but in its capacity to mobilize and harness the full productive potential of its people. Today, when we look at automated welding, the production miracle, from 4 lost carriers to 14 Essex-class carriers in combat, is a classic lesson in industrial capacity, determination, and human strength in war. It demonstrates that, in the darkest hours, when everything seems lost, collective power, technology, and resolve can rewrite history, transforming defeat into victory and ordinary people into heroes. As the days of the Pacific War passed and the American flag flew over Tokyo Bay, the story of the 4 carriers lost in 1942, Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet, was no longer merely a memory of strategic defeat. It had become a living symbol of resilience, creativity, and the industrial power of a free nation. The new ships, from Essex-class carriers to escort carriers, did more than replace what had been lost. They multiplied America's strength, ushered in a new era for the U.S. Navy, and demonstrated the might of democratic industrial capability. This victory is not just a story about ships and fleets, it is a story about people. Margaret Thompson, Emma Rodriguez, James Washington, and millions of other workers became unsung heroes, wielding welding torches and rivet guns, operating cranes and organizing supply chains with unprecedented speed and skill. They transformed factories, shipyards, and production lines into decisive weapons of victory. Every weld, steel plate, cable, and assembled component became a link in the chain of triumph, a testament to the power of unity and individual responsibility within a democratic society. On the battlefield, the production miracle altered the course of the war. The battles of the Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Okinawa, and the island invasions all demonstrated that when the U.S. lost a carrier, 2 others were already ready to sail. When Japan ran short of pilots and the capacity to sustain forces, the result was absolute dominance and undeniable victory. This outcome stands as a living proof of a strategic principle. In modern warfare, continuous large-scale production can determine victory more decisively than tactics or advanced technology. The production miracle's impact extended far beyond the military sphere, leaving a broad legacy in multiple domains. Post-war American industry inherited advanced welding techniques, modular prefabrication, supply chain management, and standardized components, all forming the foundation of modern industry. The workforce trained in shipyards became the core labor force for post-war industries, from mechanical engineering, civilian shipbuilding, and heavy machinery production to modern technology. Socially, the war opened unprecedented opportunities and equality. Women, African Americans, and previously restricted groups proved they could perform work requiring high skill and responsibility. They not only helped achieve victory, but also paved the way for lasting social and professional reforms after the war. This was a clear demonstration of the power of democracy. When people are given opportunity and responsibility, they can make an impact far beyond what was previously imagined. Economically, the massive flow of funds into shipyards, paying millions of workers and covering operational costs, created a new middle class and spurred development in housing, infrastructure, education, and public services. Essex-class carriers, light carriers, and escort carriers were not only instruments of war, but also drivers of economic growth, proving that modern warfare can stimulate industrial innovation and social development. Another important lesson lies in the combination of technology, management, and human spirit. Every Essex-class carrier was built not just through automated welding or modular prefabrication, but through human focus, discipline, creativity, and willpower. From Margaret Thompson to engineers and shipyard managers, all demonstrated that in the darkest hours, ordinary people can become heroes, turning strategic failures into unimaginable victories. The production miracle also redefined naval strategy. After 1945, the U.S. maintained global naval superiority, not just through technology or ships, but through the ability to generate and deploy forces continuously, rapidly, and at scale. This remains a valuable lesson for future military leaders. In modern warfare, the ability to sustain production and deploy forces can determine long-term outcomes. The future-facing lesson from this story is equally clear. America's production miracle shows that any great challenge, whether war or societal crisis, can be overcome if the nation is united. People are fully mobilized, and technology is effectively leveraged. Today, facing climate change, economic crises, or global conflicts, the lessons of production power, unity, and innovation remain fully relevant. Culturally and spiritually, the legacy is also profound. Workers, engineers, women, and African Americans left a timeless message. When freedom is threatened, when victory seems impossible, human cooperation, labor, and creativity can produce miracles. Essex-class carriers were not just instruments of war. They symbolized determination, spirit, and belief in human capability within a democratic society. Looking back, from the 4 carriers lost in 1942 to over 14 Essex-class carriers produced during the war, we see a story of resilience, innovation, and the strength of democratic industrial capacity. This event not only determined the outcome of World War II, but also set the standard for modern industrial warfare, where any nation seeking victory must understand that military strength is inseparable from industrial capability and human spirit. Ultimately, America's production miracle in World War II is a vivid lesson in collective power, transforming disaster into victory and the potential of a free nation under pressure. Workers, engineers, women, and African Americans, the unsung heroes, proved that true victory is measured not only in ships or weapons, but in human will, labor, and creativity. Today, as we look at modern fleets, shipyards, and diverse workforces, this legacy remains intact. It reminds new generations that freedom, unity, innovation, and production capacity are the strongest weapons a nation can possess. In just 36 months, from the loss of 4 carriers, America overcame all obstacles to achieve absolute maritime dominance, a lesson that remains timeless. When freedom is threatened, human beings can surpass all limits to protect and build the future. In the end, the story of the 1942 disaster and the 1943-1945 production miracle is a historical testament that war, industry, and human effort are inseparable. When democracy is fully mobilized, miracles can occur, and from failure, victory can emerge. It is not just a story of war, but a message for all generations. True power does not lie solely in weapons, but in the capacity of people to achieve the extraordinary together.